Hello, YouTube. Sidekick here with another episode of 30 Years of Moving Mud, a History of Iron Bombing podcast. This is a special episode of the podcast. Let's call it a History of Iron Bombing mission episode. In these special episodes, I kind of step out of the historical narrative that we're usually talking about and take an actual look at flying a DCS iron bomber in a mission that feels a little bit like a mission that pilots would have flown in real life. There are obviously some pretty severe limits on that accuracy imposed by DCS, but there still is a fair bit we can do to at least give a flavor for how these aircraft were flown historically. Now, today, of course, we're looking at the A-4. In making this mission, there were a few things that I wanted to emphasize. These are things that, to some extent, are a little bit tough to do in DCS, but that were clearly at the center of the real-world experience of pilots that flew the A-4 in Vietnam. This is heavily influenced by the book Dead Men Flying by Mike Mullane, which I just finished reading. And although I can't really claim to do the description in that book justice, the book did provide some really good insights into the things that were important to pilots at the time. And so there were three things that I really wanted to emphasize in this mission. The first was kind of the basic format of the mission. And that is that it's a large target area being attacked by a large number of iron bombs carried by a large number of aircraft. In effect, in this mission, we are emphasizing volume over precision in the delivery of the bombs, much more like was typical of, say, the Second World War or even Korea, and much less like is done today with the preponderance of precision guided munitions. The other thing is that the mission is one in which the ingress by all aircraft should be pretty high, like over 10,000 feet, since that was typical of the way aircraft operated in Vietnam, at least after the first few months. We will also be flying as part of a very large mission. It will be a large discipline formation. The airspace will be pretty crowded. There will be lots of targets for AAA over the target area. But the other thing to remember is that we'll be following a predetermined plan. We will not be making any of this up in the air. We will be trying our best to execute the plan as we have been ordered to do it. And the last thing that I wanted to emphasize was the AAA environment. I wanted to make a AAA environment that was visually impressive and effective at making us think about how we were flying, but also pretty non-lethal. Which is as opposed to the usual DCS situation, which is kind of the opposite, where flak is actually not necessarily all that impressive. Sometimes it's very hard to see. It kind of surprises you, but then it's also quite lethal. And so I think it's important to understand, how lethality actually worked in real life, like compared to how it does in DCS. Like if you programmed a mission in DCS where the lethality of the flak was, say, 4 or 5%, that would seem pretty negligible. It would mean that it would only get you once if you flew the mission 20 times. But for pilots at the time who would fly twice a day for 3 weeks at a time, and then that's called a line period, and they'd fly 4 of those in a 6-month tour. If such a pilot flew 30 times in one of those line periods, say, a 5% kill rate by flak would have meant that their chances of survival was only 1 in 5. Or put another way, in a squadron of 20 pilots, only 4 pilots would survive a 3-week line period where there was a 5% kill rate on their missions. I mean, this rate of loss would have been completely unsustainable by the Navy. They really needed to add for kill rates much less than that, like less than 1% even. So the trick is to implement AAA so that in DCS so that it affects the way you fly the mission, because that's what it did in Vietnam. It was very effective because it prevented the missions from being flown in ways that would have made the aircraft more accurate. But it also in DCS needs to be implemented in a way that it doesn't kill you all that often, because that's, again, the way it worked. The flak was there and it prevented the aircraft from operating in a certain way, but if they operated in the ways they did, then the flak was only 1 or 2% effective at most. So kind of a lot of thought had to go into how to achieve that in this mission. I don't think I got all the way there. I think the flak is pretty impressive, but I think it could have been more impressive. I think the lethality level's about right, though. The lethality increases dramatically if you fly this mission at a low level, by the way, but if you fly at the altitudes you're supposed to, then you're reasonably safe so long as you fly properly, which means a lot of jinking, and countermeasures and that sort of thing. So after reading Dead Men Flying, I also realized that this mission really should have a SAM component. And then that SAM component should have had an associated iron hand elements to deal with it. But putting that into the mission would have required some pretty serious customization that I really didn't have time to do. So effectively, I've kind of abstracted that by just assuming that the SAM threat has been largely neutralized by iron hand elements as we approach the target. Okay, so that's the basic considerations that went into the mission. Let's fire up the mission editor here and just take a look at how the mission looks. Okay, so the mission is very similar to the one that I made a video about a little while ago called Return to Haiphong Harbor. The only difference here is that the strike force is going to go in at high altitude instead of doing a low-level ingress like they did in that mission. So there are two basic groups of aircraft. There are 8 flak suppression aircraft in 2 flights of 2 elements each, and there are 12 strike aircraft in 3 flights of 2 elements each as well. All of those aircraft start in one big formation and fly to something called Point Whiskey, basically the initial point for the attack, at which point the formation breaks up. The strike package goes to the right and starts to climb and then also starts to spread out. And the flak suppression elements basically stay straight on, speed up a little bit to 350 knots. So the idea is that the strike package is going to go feet dry a little bit farther south down the coast and then fly along the valley behind the harbor while the flak busters go in the front of the harbor and take out the flak sites that are actually closest to the targets. So there are 4 player slots in those 2 flights. Their first one is actually the wingman of the first flak suppression element. You'll fly on the right-hand side of the harbor and you'll fly wingman to the flight leader. The second player slot is the element leader of the second flak suppression element. So again, you'll fly on the right-hand side of the harbor, but you'll be the lead of the flight that time. There's also a player slot for the leader of Strike Package 1, so the very first strike aircraft into the zone. And there is a slot for the leader of Strike Package 3. So you would be leading the third flight of 4 aircraft, basically be the last group of aircraft into the target area. So in all cases, you'll deploy your ordnance and then head out of the harbor through the northwest corner and around the headland and trying to put the headland between you and the harbor and all of the AAA. So in terms of loadout, the Flakbuster 1 position, so Flakbuster 1-2, is armed with Zuni rockets, 16 Zuni rockets. The second Flakbuster element is armed with 4 Mark 82 bombs on the center rail, and each of the strikes are armed with 2 Mark 83 bombs on the center rail. Now, in addition to those sort of historic roles, there are also 5 slots in the mission in case there are extra players, which are referred to as the Bambinos. And this is a reference to the fact that they are the cleanup batters for Red Sox fans. And the idea is that these are ahistorical roles. They're armed with both rockets and bombs, and you can basically freelance and do whatever you like in the mission. And particularly lets you fly in behind the formation and see what's going on and then pick your targets from there. But that is not really a historical role, but if you've got enough players to fill them, or if you just want to sort of take a look around during the mission, then they're a useful way to fly the mission. So as we get ready to fly the mission here, it's a peaceful morning in our simulated Haiphong Harbor. So today we're actually flying in a multiplayer session. There are 4 guest pilots flying. I'll get them to introduce themselves here in a minute. We actually have flown the mission several times, and so what you're going to see in this video is excerpts from multiple tries through the mission. I'm not going to narrate it very much. I'm actually going to leave it up to the guys who did most of the flying to tell you about their experiences of flying this mission and how it compares to other missions in DCS and what they thought of it as a historical simulation. So I think the guys are just about in their jets and ready to go, so let's get started.
Well, my name is Ivan. I go by the nickname of Draken35 in the forums and YouTube and Discord. I've been into flight simulation since the 86, I think. I mean, it was with a PC game named Falcon. I think it was 2.0. I don't recall the version. It was one of the early ones. After that, well, I went away for a little bit because I felt that something was missing. Fast forward 20 years, I found VR. And I knew about DCS, but I found that DCS supported VR. And I decided to give it a try 3 years ago. Well, here I am. If I don't fly any other way with VR.
Hi, I'm Highland Spring. I've been flying in DCS for just over 2 years. And I've been finding that I've been preferring to fly Cold War era type jets, the A-4 being a historical classic among those. It's also got the best knee board in DCS.
Hello everybody, my name is AMBeXT. I have a couple of 100 hours of experience on DCS, not that much on the A4 to be honest. I was interested in flying the mission because it's always nice to fly with good people, so thanks a lot Sidekick for organizing that, and I was looking forward to challenge myself a bit with some precision bombing under pressure.
Hey, I'm Moldy. I've been flying DCS for about 1.5 years now. About half the time I've been playing, I've been in a competitive squadron where we do PvP events, mostly air-to-air. But I still really like the Cold War setting too, so I play on Enigma's Cold War. I do some A4 in there, but I find more enjoyment in the A4 kind of just practicing bombing runs and doing that on a range or in missions than playing in a multiplayer environment that's as chaotic as like the Enigma Cold War server. After trying that mission out, well, I tried it out a while ago, and then I saw you were hosting one for multiple people to do. I thought it'd be really cool to be in the mission in a large formation, flying with other people, coordinating and all attacking a target at the same time.
It's a quite busy mission, especially when you're over. In general, all the mission is busy. You have plenty of planes on the air in relatively close proximity, and you have to keep focus on them, fixing your switches inside the cockpit, all in the air, a relatively short trip to the IP. So you are busy.
One of the aspects about the mission that I really enjoyed was the fact that you could take multiple different roles. The way Sidekick had built the mission, you're already in the air, you're about 10 minutes out, 11 minutes out. So the overall mission itself was maybe 15 minutes, and that allows you to replay it and use it as a practice mission as well, just for getting your iron bombing better or your rocket firing better. And then on top of that, being able to fly it multiplayer with real people in the other A4s as part of the squadron, that was also really appealing, and I was looking forward to doing that.
Okay, so much for the introductions. I think everybody's fenced in. The strike packages have headed up the valley. The flak busters are coming in. I think it's time to get this party started. As you can see, the target area does get busy once all of the flights start to arrive. As I said, we flew multiple missions. Everybody flew a different role on each of the missions, so there was lots of things to talk about. And so I'm just going to turn it back over to the guys that flew it to tell you a little bit about the highlights and the lowlights that they had and some of their general impressions of the mission.
No matter how ready you think you are, that final roll in and dive in to the target area, it always happens faster than you can actually manage it comfortably. Everything happens a lot quicker than you expect it to, and before you know it, your bobs are gone and you're trying to get out of dodge as quickly and as low as you can. It was really, really great fun.
I was flying on the flag suppression on the slot that is armed with bombs, with the 4 Mark 82s on the center line. Everything went well. We passed whiskey, and I'm fencing, so I thought, and went to the hyphen bay. Suddenly, a 57 Mike battery started firing on me, and I started jinking that crazy. I detected the muzzle flashes on the ground because that's the only thing I saw. The ambience of the mission is really good. I really like the timing and the weather that you combine for the lighting. It's really good. So I decided to dive in. I was really close, and it was a steep dive. Put the Piper on the target, press pickle to designate. I was using the bombing computer, and not on. What? It was a moment realization in which I stopped jinking And that's all it took. I mean, they got me.
I would say in terms of highlights, the first one would be my first flight. So the first flight, just a really clean roll-in. I was the person in charge of bombing the oil refinery, so strike one, like very steady flight along the path in the valley, then clean roll-in, clean descent, clean release, and exit. So nothing fancy, but it's exactly the point.
I did the strike. I hit the strike target. It was a lot easier because all the flak was really preoccupied with the flak busters, and we got in there immediately after them. We were just able to get in and knock out the target without much issue. Actually, I think I did strike 3 and then strike 1. That was my memory of strike 1. Strike 3, I was coming up behind. I was really trying to ease off on the throttle and hit that 300 knots on the way in, check my spacing. And then by the time I got in there, the flak busters were largely gone. Strike 1 was largely gone. And there were a lot of angry computerized flak people who were pointing right at me. So that I had to jink and time my jink so I could roll in. I hit the target every time, which I was happy with.
The other aspect of it that I remember vividly is the after the bombing run, or the flak runs, just getting out across the harbour, across the town, and trying to get behind the valley for cover. You could see the anti-aircraft fire coming behind you. You can get hit quite a couple of times as well, but it was just it really helped to visualise what it must have been like for these guys back in the Vietnam era days when they were doing the mission.
The overall impression of the mission was extremely positive compared to a typical mission. It's a bit more preparation and the short intense moment over the target. Also a good amount of flak. That being said, Sidekick was nice with us and the flak was actually pretty easy.
That is what I liked about this mission, is the things that work in Dead Men Flying worked here. Like when I was doing the jinking, just going through and hitting those targets and following the flight plan, I didn't get hit at all the whole time. Part of that's luck because I didn't get hit by the barrages. Part of it is just keeping that jinking going and trying to stay high and all of that.
I think there are a lot of good missions out there that try and be historically accurate. Those are my favourite type of missions, whether it's mosquito missions for World War II, reflected World War II campaigns. But there's very few that I can recall Vietnam based. There are a couple. I have flown a couple, but Sidekick put a lot of effort into these ones, and it was very, very enjoyable. No matter what role you take, it's a very, very enjoyable and excellent experience. And like I said, they also work very, very well as training missions. Because they're relatively short. If you die, you just respawn, you run it again. And I'm actually going to continue to use it for that role because my bombing could do with a lot of improvement.
I wouldn't say it's tough. It's not really a tough mission, but it really keeps you in your toes. Even in the way out, I remember other of the instances that I was actually feet wet out of the range, I thought, and I started seeing black puff around me.
It was not too hard, so I guess I would be really looking forward to a session where we do the same with a proper carrier landing at the end. It's always better to have a bit of pressure on the landing, and when you've done 30, 40, 1 hour, 30 minutes of play or 1 hour of play, the landings are just not the same. You don't want to miss after having invested so much in the mission. And secondly, on having a bit more competent flak, so to put a bit more pressure on the planes.
Just flying in a big formation like that, it's really cool. I think it'd be cool for there to be an SI2 in it. Just that that experience, and that would require some more communication. Especially, I don't know how good the RWR is in terms of if you're gonna get a spike from it, even if you're not the main guy. That's a big thing in Dead Men Flying, right? Is they might all hear their RWR, but you still don't know when you're in that big a formation. You don't know who it's targeting. I haven't flown in large formations against an SA2 in DCS, but I don't know if it'll give you a bunch of collateral spikes across the formation. But then you really do need to be able to pick out who it's going towards.
Well, that's going to wrap it up as everyone kind of heads out of town here. So let me give you my impressions after having seen the others fly and hearing their thoughts about it. First of all, I do think that it is a decent attempt at recreating a historical A4 mission. I'd encourage you to come to my Discord channel and download it. Give it a try. Either as a single player or by hosting a multiplayer session with your friends. The mission will support either. I do think that the mission points out, though, kind of a conundrum in DCS. There is a fundamental tension between being a good game and being a realistic historical simulation. As most of the guys who flew it will tell you, as a game, this mission is pretty easy. Compared to a lot of DCS missions on multiplayer servers, it's more straightforward and the threats are frankly less lethal. But, on the other hand, despite being easy in game terms, the mission is actually far more dangerous than typical missions in Vietnam were. I mean, I actually checked the TACView files of the 4 runs that we flew, and in total, we lost 8 planes out of about 80 that flew, so 10%. I mean, in other words, if those 4 missions represented 2 days of flying for a squadron of 20, in an attack squadron aboard a U.S. carrier, that would have meant that 8 pilots out of 20 would have been killed or captured in 2 days out of a 21-day line period. That's a loss rate that would have been completely catastrophic. It could not have continued that way, and something would have been done to change the odds. So, as I said, it's kind of a conundrum for recreating history in DCS. I mean, done well, historical missions may be interesting as recreations of historical events, but they may not actually be a fun or challenging way to play the game. Which, I guess, is kind of why I'm interested in making those kinds of missions. They may not be the missions you want to fly every day, but they do provide a little bit of an interactive window into history that DCS as a sandbox is actually able to provide for us. So I hope you enjoyed that little recreation in this video today. And if you do fly in DCS, I really would encourage you to download the mission and give it a try. It is interesting. I'll be updating the mission based on some of the suggestions that you heard today. I will definitely add a carrier that you'll be able to go to and land on once you complete the mission. It's going to be a good ways south of the target, so you can kind of get a feel for what it would have been like to decompress on the way home, only to then have to get ready to complete the highly non-trivial task of landing on the carrier. I may also take a look at tweaking the flak a little bit. I think it could be better. Specifically, I'd like it to be better at forcing players to fly more historically, meaning coming in high, staying high, dropping from altitude. But I don't really want to make it a whole lot much more lethal than it is if you fly the mission properly, because I think it's about right now. Now, I also do want to take a look at adding an SA2 or more to the mix, but that's really a pretty big job that will certainly require some careful modifications to get it to work properly, to make the SA2s and any AI iron hand jets, they're going to have to react to each other properly. And unfortunately, that's going to take some doing. So that particular task is going to have to go onto the to-do list for now. Well, that's going to do it for the podcast episode today. As always, please do like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. In addition, if you really do enjoy the podcast, please let people know, both by word of mouth and through your own social media. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.